Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. In this episode, I interview retired Special Agent John Ligato, who served in the FBI for more than 20 years. John spent most of his career working organized crime and narcotics investigations. He was also a bureau pilot for 4 years. John is interviewed about his 8-year role as a deep undercover agent, wherein he operated strip clubs, yes, strip clubs for the Bureau, in Memphis to gather evidence against bikers selling drugs and stolen property, and in Cleveland in order to infiltrate the mob. John's efforts in the case in Cleveland resulted in one of the largest public corruption cases involving members of law enforcement in the Bureau's history. Of all of the podcast episodes I've conducted so far, this will be one of my favorites. The main reason being that John and I are old friends. We actually attended the FBI Academy together, NAC 8210. At that time, I was a 25-year-old former probation officer, and John was a 35-year-old former teacher and counselor working with developmentally disabled kids and adults, or so I thought. Even in this episode, he fails to highlight that he is indeed a Vietnam War hero with 3 Purple Hearts. After you listen to the interview, please click on the link in the episode show notes to watch a clip of John talking about being a pissed-off 19-year-old Marine fighting in the middle of the 1968 Tet Offensive. Wow, who knew? During the interview, you'll also hear John and I mention the names Vicky and Kathy several times. Vicky and Kathy are 2 FBI agents who have been co-case agents on several successful, high-profile corruption cases in Philadelphia. Actually, their investigation targeting corruption in the Philadelphia strip club industry was the inspiration for my novel, Pay to Play, which will be released in September. Vicky and Kathy are legendary in Philadelphia, and I'm working to get them on the podcast soon to talk about their strip club case. Kathy's retired and she's on board, but Vicky is still an active agent, so I need to go through FBI HQ to get permission for her to participate. I talked about John having a case involving strip clubs and Vicky and Kathy having a case involving strip clubs. So you must be wondering, what's the deal with the FBI and strip clubs? Well, the answer to that is that strip clubs can be magnets for crime, such as organized crime, public corruption, tax fraud, and overbilling schemes. If you're interested in learning more, sign up for my quarterly newsletter, and I'll send you my case file review of some of the FBI's most sensational strip club investigations. Now here's the show. Hi, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce my guest for today, John Ligato. John, how are you?
Good, Jerry. How you doing?
I am doing great. We really haven't talked since New Agents class, and I Googled you, and wow, what you've been doing since we graduated and got our credentials is absolutely amazing. So tell me a little bit, give me a little tease about the case, or cases that you're going to talk about today.
Well, you know, I'm Italian from South Philly, so early on I got into undercover work, and deep undercover work, which we can talk about the difference later between short-term and originally went undercover with some bikers in Pittsburgh, and then branched out to the major leagues, which is organized crime, you know, the Italian mafia. Did a total of 8 years in deep cover, and then actually went on a contract after I retired for another 2 years with the Bureau on an undercover case. So other than I flew 5 years for the Bureau in the Special Ops, so I've basically been undercover flying, and then I worked some major cases in organized crime as a case agent.
Well, I cannot wait to get into this. This is going to be so cool. But before we get started, I just want people to know, who you are. So why don't you just give us a brief overview of what you were doing before you got into the Bureau and places that you were assigned while you were in the Bureau. and then we'll get right back into your undercover activities.
Yeah, well, in 1965, Jerry, I was the first person in my large Italian family to get accepted to college. And in 1966, I was the first person in my family to get expelled from college. So
you got to tell us a little bit more. I mean, why did you get expelled?
I've never told that story. Maybe once, liquor in Okinawa once, but I was bad. It wasn't for grades. I had good grades, but I was naughty, and that was when there was only two deferments. There was medical and student. So I lost my student deferment, and a Marine Corps recruiter promised to fly me to Paris Island. So I had never been on a plane before, so I joined the Marine Corps in '67, and got sent right to Vietnam in 1967, '68. Got out, actually got wounded, got out of the hospital, went back to college and got my bachelor's and master's, and worked with handicapped kids for 10 years. Developmentally disabled kids and adults in western Pennsylvania. And then joined the FBI and took one look at me and said, how would you like to go undercover? And that's what I did.
All right. So tell us about it.
Well, back then they didn't have all the restrictions now with you had to be certified. It was just like, okay, you look good. My first undercover case was with bikers in Pittsburgh, the Pagans, and that was fun. But as you know, back then you got transferred right away to back then it was a large office, and on my way I got orders to Memphis, the first office. And I went to Memphis and was there about 2 months, and they said, have you ever done undercover work? And I said, yeah. So they put me in a topless gentleman's club as a sub-manager, and that was interesting. I worked bikers and theft and drugs and guns, and and those places were a magnet for those types of violations back in the 80s. Bought a lot of drugs, rode a motorcycle, my hair was long, and it was a great 2.5 years in Memphis.
So 2.5 years as your bureau career, you were a manager at a strip club.
Yeah.
and we paid you, and you got paid for that.
It gets better than that, and I know you talked to a friend of ours, Vicky. I'll get into this, but years later, I was actually the owner of one for 4 years. But that's later in my career. But yeah, listen, what are you going to do? Somebody had to do it, Jerry.
I guess it was almost like the same thing as in a theft investigation. If you were running a pawn shop, where you, but in your particular case.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a lot more interesting than running a pawn shop.
Yeah, you got to be young to do that. I would have to take naps now, but so I get transferred to New York City, which was everybody's nightmare back in the 80s because it usually was a 10-year stint, and they had no cost of living back then. As guys were going bankrupt, they couldn't sell their homes. The interest rate back in the Carter administration was like 18%. And the interim where they sent me 2 years undercover on a case on TDY against the LaRocca family in Pittsburgh. They had an organized crime family. And I thought I was pretty good, but nothing happened. I could not get one violation in that amount of time, and I was like really bummed out. I'm thinking, I know these guys are bad, but they're taking me to church. They're, taking me to their mother's house for dinner, and so they transferred me to New York, and I was really bummed out because I thought maybe I'm not that good. And then I found out the secretary, the FBI secretary, the organized crime secretary, was sleeping with a mob guy and dined me out. So they knew I was a undercover agent.
Wow. So what happened to her?
She got indicted, and, I was in New York at the time. She got indicted. She told them. What happened before that is they had this nightclub in Pittsburgh called the Holiday House, which was a mob hangout, and they called her from the Holiday House. and they said her name was Jackie. They said, Jackie, is he a snitch or an agent? And she said, oh, he's an agent. And we later found out that if she had said snitch, they were going to kill me.
Wow.
But this was all 2 years after.
So you actually hung up. They knew almost immediately your true identity, and you still, because you didn't know, you hung up with them for 2 years trying to get information, not knowing all along that they knew exactly who you were.
They knew exactly. And what's funny is, they had the orders to treat me nice, but there was one guy who was the enforcer, Frankie, and he couldn't treat me nice because he knew I was an agent, even though they told him to, and he was constantly screwing with me. So finally, Frankie and I had it out. It wasn't good, but you don't have your gun in bad, so you can't call timeout and say, listen, you can't hit me. I'm an FBI agent. So
he roughed you up a bit.
He roughed me up. Yeah, I'm small. You know that. I think I bit his ear or something. I don't know what I did, but they broke it up, and now I know why Frankie didn't like me.
He had cause.
He had cause, right? Listen, I wouldn't like it if we were infiltrated by the mob. I wouldn't be too friendly.
No. All right, so you're back in New York now, and you're going to give it another go.
Yeah, I go to New York, and I'm assigned to Lou Chilero's squad, which was the Pizzagate squad out in Queens. I didn't do much undercover work there. I had a case, but I did have one case because the main undercover in New York was Louis Carbono or something, and he spoke Sicilian. And they wanted him to do an undercover case, and he didn't want to do it. He said, give it to the new guy. And that was a case where I ordered red-eye missiles from a Nicaraguan general in cocaine, and it was on page 7 of the New York Times. Could you imagine if that happened now?
Wow.
It was no big thing. FBI undercover agent didn't even put me by name, was involved in an undercover sting with General Douglas Zagarius, and ordered several thousand red-eye missiles and cocaine. It was like no big thing in 19 whatever it was.
Yeah, that would be huge now. That would be front page of every newspaper and, of course, the evening news.
I got transferred out of New York to go deep cover in Buffalo. Believe it or not, Buffalo, New York had a very active LCN family, and they were hooked up with Toronto, Canada, which people don't realize also has a large mafia family. We made some cases, nothing spectacular in Buffalo, and then I got transferred to Cleveland.
Cleveland, I know also had, or at least had, I don't know if they still do, but, had a large family.
A large family, yeah. And, most of the Italian mafia is gone, unfortunately, and I say that not because I like criminals, but because they were decent criminals, it was always business. They never whacked innocent people, and there was a certain rule. But anyway, I'm in Cleveland, and after a year, we had a source that owned gentlemen's clubs, and I was installed as the silent owner of a high-end gentlemen's club. And from there, things happened.
And when you say you were a silent owner, could you explain that to the listeners?
Yeah, basically the word went out through the management. The high-ups told the management, now they had no idea I was an agent, that this guy, Johnny Calabria, we're going to send, and he has money into these clubs, so treat him as you would me.
So who's cooperating? Who's cooperating that is giving you this introduction?
Well, I can't give a name, but because I can't.
Understood.
But I went to Vegas. As I'm in this cover, and I met a New York Gambino named Ronnie Marazza. Ronnie Marazza was a capo in New York and went to Vegas, and sort of Vegas was an open city, which means that no family controlled the city, but certain mafia families controlled casinos, and they were skimming and stuff back then. So Ronnie and I got together, took a year, and we're doing criminal activities. I was laundering money through his nightclub. And I said, I want to go back to Cleveland, and I got to look after this club. Do you know anybody in Cleveland? Well, we knew he knew people in Cleveland because he was at Lewisburg with a mafia guy named Richard Vicarone. And I said, if you introduce me to somebody in Cleveland, I'll give you 10% of any money we make from that guy. And that's what happened. And from that one guy, Ronnie Marazzo, we ended up indicting over 100 people 4 years later.
Wow. All in Cleveland or throughout the U.S.?
No, all throughout the Bureau. And actually, I even went to London when some Scotland Yard operatives needed a vouch from an Italian mafia guy in America. But what happens is, as you know, as you meet criminals, the word gets out, especially if you're spending 4 years, then they've done criminal activities with you. So they say, well, you can't be FBI because we haven't been arrested. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm going back and forth, and Vicarone was in Lewisburg with Marazzo and a guy by the name of Frank Natali, who was the boss of the Philadelphia family at the time.
Yes, I know the name. I recognize the name.
Yeah, so I tell Vicarone, I said, listen, I want to make a move in Philly. Can you introduce me to Natali? We go to Philly. Natali's all worried because they had these young bucks, these Italian kids that wanted to take over the family. And he was headed by Joey Merlino.
Another name I know.
Yeah. And eventually the young guys took the family from Natal, who ended up being a snitcher.
I got to stop you for a minute because you're from Philadelphia. When you are undercover, aren't you afraid you're going to run into somebody you know?
That's a good question. I left Philadelphia when I graduated high school, and I graduated high school at 17. And to be honest with you, I didn't even look like I did back when I was 17. And I really didn't bump into anybody. I was careful about it. I didn't go into certain areas or certain restaurants or something. In their head, I was from Cleveland.
Okay.
So I would come in, do the meetings, and get out. But I did worry. And in fact, they made a movie called Tempted Wolf, which sort of loosely depicted that time period because I had a cousin who was he was an associate. And his cousin was the underboss. I know this is getting very complicated. So, answer to your question, I had to be real careful where I went and who I met with.
Okay. And we'll talk about that movie, 10th and Wolf, after we discuss the case, because that's very interesting too. Okay, so back to the case.
Well, back to the case is I'm making violations in Toledo. I'm making violations in Youngstown, in Vegas, in Chicago, in L.A.
And what are these violations? What are you getting them on? What are they doing?
Depending on what they were doing. For example, if the Toledo guys were selling guns, so I went and bought guns. The L.A. guys were selling coke, so I went and bought coke. Whatever their particular violation that they were engaged in, and the good thing is these guys, these high-ranking mafia guys, would vouch for me. They would call whoever the contact was and say, I'm sending out Johnny. You can deal with him. You can trust him. So it was like this wonderful, reference, and then what I would do is I would stay there a while and gain their confidence and start a business or do something there and then say, I'm going back to Cleveland. Let me introduce you to Jerry Williams here, and she's going to be my gal and take over. So we had FBI undercover agents around the country who were then embedded in the areas where I went and set up shop.
Wow. That's absolutely fascinating. So during this whole time, do you go into the office? Are you ever in the actual role of, an FBI agent carrying creds and a gun?
No. There's two kinds of undercover. There's short-term, which I've done, is where you say you're working a narcotics squad, you go in and into the office, you get the troops, you get the money, you go out and make a buy, and then you either bust them or let it roll, and then you come back in the office, you go home, you take your kids to soccer practice, and you do short-term buys. I was deep. I had no badge, no gun, never went in the office. And to be honest with you, it was, for me, with my personality, it actually worked better. I'm not an office type.
Were you married? Did you have a family, or you really, were out there alone?
I was married, and it was tough. I mean, I missed my daughter's baptism. I mean, not proud to say it, but you got to sacrifice, and you got to have the right wife, and I did, and I do, and I'm still married. I think you met Lori at graduation. We're married 46 years next week. So,
now, would she go on these undercover assignments with you then?
No.
So she was back in Cleveland?
Actually in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, she moved. At one point when I was in Buffalo, she was about 100, 200 miles away in a cabin. I would try to sneak there whenever. But it's a tough life. I mean, it's sort of like the military where you're deployed.
But in the military, when you're deployed, you kind of know how long you're going to be away. How long you're going to be away depends on how the case is going. So it's always, up in the air.
Yeah, but you never expected 4 years. You're right. I mean,
yeah.
You never. And what happened is it just kept going. And the biggest thing in this case, what happened is at the strip club, there was this guy named Michael Joy, and he was a bouncer. I forget what we called him, a better name for a bouncer, but anyway. And he was a security guard, but he was also at the prison. He was a prison guard, and he was friends with a lot of cops. So he came to me one day and said, listen, he sees me at the club, and he sees, who I'm talking with. He's not dumb. So he says, look, I can get you all the dirty cops you want. And I said, I'm not interested. I didn't want to get into a corruption case because I was doing a mob case. And then, 8 months later, he said, listen, man, I'm telling you, I can get you all the dirty cops you want. And I said, I'm not interested in dirty cops. And the third time he said it, I took him up on it. And it turned into, at the time, the largest corruption case in U.S. history. There was over 52 cops arrested for narcotics charges.
And what department was this again? Are you still in Cleveland?
Yeah, well, there was many departments. That's the thing. There was some from Cleveland and Euclid and Bedford Heights, all the surrounding departments. Yeah.
That's sad. That is just
sad.
Yeah, absolutely sad. So this was something you weren't even targeting, corruption in the police departments, and somebody kept wanting to, give you this extra information that at some point you just couldn't ignore it anymore.
That's right. Again, my father was a Philadelphia cop, and to be real honest with you, there had been stings with police officers that I didn't think the Bureau did right. And I'll give you an example. There was one where they had a gambling operation, the FBI, and they had cameras set up, and anyway, they had a cop who guarded the parking lot. He got like $300-400 a night to guard the parking lot where the people were gambling in the FBI sting thing, and they brought him in and they paid him off on camera, and he didn't even know, what the hell it was. I mean, he saw it was gambling, but I mean, this poor guy had 3 kids, and they ended up indicting him. And I thought, to me, that was questionable. So my whole issue with even starting the thing, I said, if we're going to do this, it's not going to be, these charges like guarding the parking lot. It's going to be drugs. And that's what we did. And we not only did that, but we would meet with the cops the day before. And we would tell them that what you're about to do tomorrow is illegal, and it's punishable by federal law, and you can get 5 years. We warned them. So if you want to come back tomorrow, come back. If you don't, I don't blame you. And all but 2 guys, came back.
And in the case of the parking lot, you were okay with his department taking some type of administrative action or firing him, but a federal indictment just seemed to be a bit.
To me, it did. And again, I don't know. Maybe it was just me, but I I wanted to do this one right. I wanted to let the cops know what they were doing. In fact, one of the reasons there was no trials is the defense got the tapes, obviously. And they saw that we gave them, I actually said the word cocaine. And they said, oh, you can't say cocaine. You'll scare them. I said, well, that's what I want to do. So let's say we're going to do this cocaine deal. And you can go to jail federally for 5 years. So don't do it unless you want. So, in other words, the defense is saying, listen, you idiot, they told you it was a federal crime. They told you can get 5 years. You did it anyway. There's no defense. There's no, what did you hear? Well, they didn't say cocaine. You might have thought you were guarding radios. You know how that goes there.
Right. It's right on the tape. Very clear.
Yeah.
All right. So all of the cops then pled guilty.
Yeah, they did. There was, I think, and I'm not sure the numbers, I think it was 52, 53 cops and 52 or 53 LCN figures. It was a massive roundup, and there was actually a couple funny stories along the way. One is that right before the case was supposed to end, it was about a month before, the wise guys I was dealing with in Toronto, Carlo Garibaldi and Bruno Monfaro, said, John, we just hijacked a Cuban truck full of cigars. And I said, how many? They said, it's worth $16 million. There's 400,000 Cuban cigars. We'll give it to you for $3 million. So I said, sure. I'm thinking, you're going to be arrested anyway. I'll take the cigars. And, because we know we couldn't give them the $3 million and let it walk. So I'd say, we'll take the cigars. I'll give you the money. So we send up the people up to Canada, and they get the truckload of cigars. And then because the case was so massive, they needed so many agents to do the roundups all around the country, they postponed the takedown by a month. So I owed the mafia $3 million.
Right.
And Carlos calling me after about a week, where's the money? And I'm giving him every excuse in the book. I called him, my grandmother died, and, hey, I got a bunion, whatever. So he sent 2 mob guys to get the money out of me, which was hilarious. But and that's some of the funny stuff that goes on in the case. So
what did they do? Now, wait a minute. You're telling us that you sent 2 mob guys to get the money out of you. What exactly did they do?
Well, it's actually recorded. It's a recorded conversation that's been on the news, but we sit down in my undercover apartment, and it's being recorded, and Bruno goes, hey, here's my orders. I'm to stay with you until you give us X amount of money. And there was a conversation, when are we getting it? I said, I don't know, the truck, whatever. I can't remember the excuse. And he said, well, our orders are to stay with you until we get, I think it was a few $100,000. I said, okay, you can stay with me all you want. I says, but I'm going to the club. And he said, we'll meet you at the club. I says, all right. Because I got my car exit stage left,
What? You didn't meet them at the club?
No.
You lied to them?
I lied, and not only that, but I called the club, because they had been to the club and a bunch of times. In fact, that's another funny story, but I told them not to let them in, that they owe me money. So they wouldn't even get in the club. I barred them.
Tell us a little bit about when you're doing deep undercover. What are you doing every day? Every day you're living this. So give us a day-to-day rundown of what you're doing and how you are recording this so that it can be used later as evidence for the FBI case.
Well, we had recording equipment in the apartment, but I would only record if there was a violation, either a discussion of a violation or the actual violation, because, for example, you think about this stuff. I'm in a strip club. So the girls would sit on your lap and rub your back, and, you can't have a recorder the size of a Buick on your back, so you couldn't always be wired up. But when you're with the mob, they want to see you or talk to you every day. They're like your Italian mother. And so you have to be available to them, but then you have another master called the Bureau, and you had to get reports to them, you had to get tapes to them, you had to get, meet your contact agent. So you ended up getting little sleep, But that's what you did. It became normal to live that lifestyle.
When you stopped living that lifestyle, did you miss it?
I did. I did. I was not good in the office because, for 8 years, basically, but 4 in a row, I was like, every other word was the F word and, hey, how you doing? And you can't just turn that off. And I remember coming into the office and I'm standing by the Xerox machine and there was a guy I never liked. And he come up and said something and I threw him against the wall and I'm like, what am I doing?
Oops.
I never liked the guy, but you know how it is in the civility of the office, you never would throw somebody against the wall that said something you didn't like.
No, that would not be looked upon well.
No, but it answers your question. You get used to it. I mean, 4 years is like going to college. That's your life. After a while in the Topless Club, it lost its allure. I was sitting once and I was watching Sports Center on the TVs. They have TVs all around, and these 2 beautiful strippers came up, and they were topless. And I told them to move away so I can watch the television. So that's when I knew I was in this business too long.
Yeah. Just another day.
Just another day.
Just another pair of breasts.
That's right. That was another problem that's tied with being undercover, is that when you're undercover, everybody wants to get fixed up with their sister's girlfriend or their girlfriend's girlfriend. And so what we do sometimes is we bring in female agents to act as our girlfriends, so to let them know we're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but, they wouldn't look kindly upon a gay mafia guy. And that's, we use the females, and Vicky and Cassie was used in that regard. I remember Vicky and Cassie were at the table, and this stripper got brand new silicones, and she pops them on the table, and she looks at Cassie and Vicky, and she says, what do you think? And Cassie, I'll never forget it, says, they're very nice. What could you say?
I love it. And the connection is that the novel that I wrote was inspired by Vicky and Kathy's case. Vicky and Kathy had a case of a L&I, a licensing and inspection inspector here in Philadelphia, who was taking bribes from strip club owners and from prostitutes, madam.
I met that guy.
Did you meet him?
He was we were in the back room. What's the restaurant? Francesco's on 2nd Street or something, which was a mob restaurant. And they brought him in. He was in there, the mob. I met him at the bar. He was like a fat, balding guy, if I remember.
Oh, no, it's a different guy, because this guy had lots of hair that was prematurely white. So it's a different guy.
But they brought a building inspector in there who was crooked.
Yeah.
You mean there was more than one?
Yeah, I think there was. I think Kathy and Vicky were successful in decreasing the number of corrupt building inspectors, but at the time, there were more than one.
Those 2 were fantastic.
Yeah, I can't wait to interview them on the podcast.
And Kathy's MO was a little bit like a female Columbo, because she's so sweet, and she would ask questions, and pretty soon you'd be confessing murder and you're not even realizing, because she would lead you down a verbal trap and then set it.
I love those 2. Can't wait to have them on. Well, before we move on, I do want to touch on the Joey Merlino connection that you had. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. In fact, as I was going back and forth to Philly, there was a guy named Joey DePasquale and Stevie Mazzone. So there was this Lamborghini and I had been doing deals with them in Philly, but I would just go in, do a deal, and leave. So, because I knew I had some exposure there, so I wouldn't be bouncing around. But anyway, this is a stolen Lamborghini, and the mob had it in Philly. And I said, I'll buy it. And on tape, I said, now, whose is this? And they said, what do you mean, who's this? I mean, I said, who gets a cut of this? And they said, of course, Joey gets a cut. So we went to Philly, and we bought this Lamborghini.
What's the discount price when you buy a hot Lamborghini?
This was a model with a half a year, so it was very expensive. It was like $1985 and a half, and it's a piece of crap, really, because, unless you're going to race it. But it was expensive. I don't know whether that, we probably paid 20 grand, 15 grand, something like that. But it was worth the money because Joey at this time was the boss, the capo of the Philadelphia family. And what happened eventually is Joey got indicted on RICO. You have to have 2 predicate acts, 2 previous crimes. So they had him on murder, a bunch of murders, a bunch of cocaine, gambling, and this Lamborghini. So if you were around then, the trial was amazing. I mean, they had sketch artists, and it was like a circus.
Yeah, I remember reading it in the paper, every day.
Bruce Cutler was John Gotti's attorney, and he was defending one of them. And I remember because Bruce Cutler cross-examined me for a day. I thought it was funny. But anyway, so Joey gets off. He gets acquitted on the drugs and the murder. But so we needed 2 predicate acts. He got guilty of the stupid Lamborghini and the gambling. He did 9 years basically because of the Lamborghini. And
good for you.
Yeah. Well, he's back. He's in Florida now. So, Joey, if you're listening, nothing personal. But if Marty Angelino's listening, you're a scumbag.
Now, who's that?
He's one that I never got along with in South Philly. He's a made guy, a little fat guy. Thought he was tough. I got a film the Philadelphia office took of the Lamborghini where I'm poking Marty in the chest, and somebody says that you can't do that. He's a made guy.
But you did it anyway.
Yeah, he might have been a made guy, but I was a Marine.
I like that. I like that a lot. Well, it's just unbelievable, just all the stuff that you did. I was in the office, I was working my economic fraud cases and being very, very proud, of the convictions and jail time and stuff that I generated. But based on the successful cases and all the stuff that you were out there doing while I was sitting in the office.
God bless you, because I'm serious about that. I really admire the white-collar crime people. I can't add and subtract. But, and you know what? As you know, with these mob guys and with these drug dealers, they get as much time for the financial end of the crimes, the money laundering and all that, and the income tax stuff. So it's a good marriage.
So yay for the white-collar crime agents. All right, so anything else about the case? Because you've also had a... Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, there was... Donnie Brasco was my partner. This is after he had come back in, and he was my contact, and it was kind of funny, in Florida. And we went down.
This is the Donnie Brasco from the movie.
From the movie, the Donnie Brasco. And I brought 2 Cleveland Wise guys down there, and we took them on the FBI boat, with the cameras. And so anyway, we're having dinner after about the 3rd day, and we discussed criminal activity. I think it was stolen cars. And the older made guy, there's 4 of us at the table. There's me and Joe, and I have a recording on, and Sam and Jimmy. And he says, all right, we don't want to get infiltrated by the FBI. And I look at Joe, and I'm thinking, there's 4 of us here. 2 of us are FBI agents. You've almost been infiltrated here by 50% almost, But so he looks at Joe, and he says, I'll never forget this. He says, can you read? Yeah, well, I could read. He said, well, I'm reading this book. It's Donnie Brasco. And he starts telling Donnie Brasco about Donnie Brasco, how he infiltrated the Columbos, and how you got to watch, don't do this, don't do that. And I remember looking at Joe thinking, we're burnt. And Joe shook his head no. And so at Christmas, Sam bought 2 Donnie Brasco books, wrapped them up as Christmas gifts, gave me the 2 and said, give one to your friend. I says, I'll do that.
Are you serious? So when he first started talking about it, you thought it was like a subtle threat, you know,
I
like he really knew.
Yeah, but what would you think?
Yeah, but he really was just very fascinated with the book.
Yeah, he would love to. You know what? Most mob guys watch that movie. They watch all the mob movies, and they critique it. But they watch every mob. I could remember sitting down with these guys. They want to watch mob movies, and that would never happen. And no, we don't talk like that. And that guy's stupid. And they critique it, you know. And I always thought it was hilarious.
Wow. So now, Johnny Brasco is not his real name. So your partner was actually
Joe Pistone. Yeah, that's his undercover name, Donnie Brasco.
Okay. And I take it that particular case, he was using yet another undercover name.
Right. Exactly. He came back in the bureau. He left following the movie and the book, and then he came back in and retired. But one of the techniques I would use, and people say you're crazy, but it actually worked, is I remember at a dinner in the back of a restaurant, back room, you know, where you sit and eat and drink, and I remember tapping the glass and saying, give me your attention, please. He said, I get quiet, and I said, listen, I got some bad news. I says, I'm a deep undercover agent for the FBI, and you guys are all under arrest. And there's like this maybe 3 seconds of silence, and then just this raucous laughter. They're throwing stuff at me. I mean,
if they only knew.
Well, they found out.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's just amazing, you know, all the stuff that you did. And I know that a lot of that you were able to, after you retired, you were able to continue that with books and movies and documentaries. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? Because you were busy post-retirement also. When did you retire?
2003, January, so it's over 13 and a half years. But yeah, I retired, and I had an opportunity. One thing I wasn't going to do was do what I did in the Bureau, because I saw retirement as an opportunity to do something different. So I wrote a book. I was in the movie Tent and Wolf, which was loosely based on the undercover case in South Philly. I did a TV series on A&E called Runaway Squad for a while.
And you were actually an actor. You're performing in this movie and the TV shows.
Yeah, bad actor, but an actor. Yeah, I even did comedy at Gotham Comedy Club in New York. I mean, I did whatever I wanted to do. You know, I hosted a show like a USO show for wounded veterans. You know, for raise money for wounded veterans. Went around all the country and did that with professional comedians and singers. I did a documentary. It was called Against the Odds, the Marines at Way City, which was a really emotional thing, where they did a series of documentaries on the American Heroes channel where American troops were against tremendous odds. They did that. It was a great experience. I went back to Vietnam about a year and a half ago with some POWs. You know what? I try to do what I want to do now if it's possible, and if it's not, I'll try anyway.
You mentioned also having a radio show in Cleveland for about 8 years.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I had Joe on, Donnie Brasco on almost every week for a Donnie Brasco minute. Anything I wanted to do, I got to do. It all leads back to something to do with crime and punishment. But, it was just a fun show. I need to plug my book.
Okay.
Dirty Boys is a book about the FBI and terrorism. And it's fiction, but it's not fiction, and that's the scary part. It's about our enemy fights dirty, but we don't fight dirty, and a group of former Marines now in law enforcement on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They take their gloves off and become dirty boys, and they kick terrorists' butt. But it's really a fascinating book because I use actual events like Benghazi and Boston Marathon bombing and weave a plot, cyber stuff all throughout the book.
So give us the name of the book again and tell us where we can find it.
Dirty Boys. Don't just type in Dirty Boys. You can in Amazon. You can type Dirty Boys and John Ligato, Ligato. You can get it. My publisher is Post Hill Press. Amazon's probably the best way or easiest way. It's at bookstores, some Barnes & Noble. We've had a bunch of book signings at Barnes & Noble, but Amazon, probably the easiest way.
Excellent. This is something that was recently released.
Yeah, the book came out about 7-8 months ago, and it's got great reviews. But the book is written as it's not fiction, and the most frequent observation is, my God, this is scary. This group of dirty boys ignore all the FBI and government regulations, and they operate off the books.
All right. Well, we are just about out of time. So is there anything you'd like to say about your career, about the FBI, to kind of wrap everything up?
Yeah, I love the FBI. I love the time that we were in it. I think that time has passed. Not that it's better or worse. It's different. But it's the greatest organization for law enforcement. And I love the Marine Corps. It was my honor to have been a U.S. Marine and a special agent for the FBI. 2 special institutions. And that's the end of the show. Now you can understand why this is going to be one of my favorite episodes. John's a real character with that gritty Philly attitude. As always, back at jerrywilliams.com, in this episode's show notes, you'll find photos of John and some of his mob friends, links to newspaper articles about his cases, and a link to his novel, Dirty Boys. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up to receive my case file review of other FBI strip club investigations. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. This is where in the podcast I usually provide a recommendation for crime fiction. Well, that's easy today. Go pick up a copy of John's book, Dirty Boys. The main character reminds me a lot of John. His John Booker character has that same push against the system, politically incorrect persona. I don't know. This novel may be a little bit more autobiographical than John is admitting. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetire.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back again next week for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.